We run into Jesus today, as I said, just as he's leaving the Samaritan woman at the well, from whom he asked for some water, and to whom he gave the promise of living water, of salvation. Jesus runs into his disciples returning from town where they went to buy food. They are astounded when they realize he's been talking to her. No Jewish man ever talked to a woman he didn't know in public, much less a Samaritan woman, and never, ever a woman of ill repute like she was. So no wonder the disciples are shocked. They also want to feed him. And Jesus says, I have food that you know nothing about. They didn't understand. Not about the woman, not about what sustains Jesus, and not about themselves as gardeners in charge of a harvest. Gardening. From the time I was a little kid, I loved making things grow. My dad gave me a plot of land in our backyard and when I was 7 to grow my own garden. And I was particularly good at raising pumpkins. You know, I would plant the seeds, and fortunately God would water the plants for me. And my parents said to me at one point, I was so good with pumpkins that I could grow them without even trying. So today, planting things, especially herbs and vegetables, is a relaxing thing I have so little time for during the year with all our work here. Growing anything is a challenge, you know, especially in a condo complex, and especially when you have a big, dark forest that shadows the place. So there's only a couple of places where the sun shines most of the day, and that's where I plant. Even so, you know, I manage. I put in an elevated planter about this high in front of my house, and that's where there's enough sun to grow tomatoes. And on the one side of the townhouse is another spot of sun for part of the day, and that's where I put the cucumbers and the zucchini and the yellow squash and sweet peppers and some herbs along with some mint. It's sunny enough on my deck for a few hours that I can raise the herbs that I like, all of the things I use to cook. And that's also where I have my hummingbird garden. So I'm out there with the birds. So in the spring, whatever hours I can steal on the weekend, I use to plant these things. And that's what my vacation was doing about. And you know, while I'm not around much to tend my gardens, it really does my heart good when I come home at night and I see plants starting to push up through the dirt. It's not long before I start dreaming about harvesting tomatoes and all sorts of squash and herbs and making a big pot of summer soup, just in time for my August vacation. So imagine my delight. And John, would you please help the gentleman who's trying to get in with a wheelchair? Okay. So it was just in time this year for my summer vacation. So imagine my delight on the very first day of my vacation that one of the tomatoes in the front yard started to ripen. I watched it for a week, getting redder and redder and redder. And then came the day I would pick the first tomato that would lead to the summer soup that I have been dreaming about. So I came outside to the garden that morning with a colander in my hand to take the tomato. But it was gone. Someone took it upon themselves to help themselves. Now, I wasn't happy, but I told myself there are other things still on the vine. In particular, there was one big, juicy green tomato that was hanging heavily on the vine. I could see it from my bedroom window, bright as anything as it got redder and redder and redder. So about a week later, on a Wednesday night, I looked out my bedroom window at midnight just before getting into bed at that beautiful tomato shining in the moonlight. And I said, tomorrow morning I'm going to harvest it. So the next morning at 8 a.m., I went out, and my tomato was gone. Now, I know none of my neighbors would have taken it. And while we do have bears, I don't think any of them have a particular taste for Italian food. So it was then that I realized the first missing tomato had vanished on a Thursday, too. Now, not much happens in our condo, but the very first day of the week, the Thursday of the week is when the outside company comes to do the landscaping. And they come at 7:30 in the morning. To tell you the truth, I was furious. My more compassionate minds thought, well, maybe this person is hungry. But it didn't make me feel any better. If he was hungry, he could have knocked on my door and I would have given him some of the food. But as it was, he seemed to wait each week until the thing was ripe. So I never really lost my anger about the vanishing tomatoes, but I did one thing. I took all the tomatoes that were almost starting to turn color, and I brought them in to my deck that no one can get to, where they could ripen in the sun. Those tomatoes did well. And there was, after all, the rest of the garden still growing. And then, as we all went through, the rains came. Buckets of rain this summer, as we all know. My cucumbers squeezed out a few little gherkin-sized cucumbers before they drowned, and then the pepper plant just disappeared altogether in the rain. And I have one zucchini plant that's still working on one single zucchini, and I watch it every week. But the herbs did well. Summer in my garden has been a lot like this really weird summer we've all had. And I don't like to go into politics, but a lot of what happened was done to us by politics, and it was good and bad. When you think back, since I just left on vacation 3 weeks, we have lived through not one but 2 political conventions and an attempted assassination. Some of us women have been lectured to that we are childless cat ladies who are therefore not entitled to an opinion. In Paris, people gathered on the banks of the Seine for a glorious event and ended up instead mistaking a floating tableau of Greek gods for being an insult to the Last Supper. More anger. In the area of spirituality, we endured being told by proponents of Christian nationalism that faith voters were going to determine the election, and there was only one acceptable way to vote. At the same time, doing all that stuff, we listened and we wept as a teenager. Was so proud of his dad for being proposed for national office that he wept. And then promptly people who were supposed to be adults started bullying him. Still in Paris, on the positive side, another young man with glasses like Clark Kent took them off and vaulted his way into being America's Superman at the Olympics. It's been one weird summer soup of craziness. What do we do with what we've seen and been exposed to? Somehow I feel that God is preaching us a sermon. Sometimes I feel there are people who will steal your tomatoes and say they belong to them, just like sometimes people want the power of Christianity and will say they're Christians but haven't any idea of how they're twisting the words of Jesus. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, the rains will flood your garden. Sometimes bringing in the harvest means accepting donations of fruits from other gardens, which I was glad to get as I suddenly got more tomatoes and zucchini than I could do anything with. Jesus is the ultimate gardener. We need to look to Jesus to see the ways that he plants the seeds, for that's what he was doing with the woman at the well. He was planting the seeds. And we are meant to reap the harvest as his workers, for the hard work that those who went before us and for his own sacrifices. There are many people today, and you know it, hungry and eager for the joy one can find in knowing God, who are tired of hatred and anger around us. Bring them here. When you run into them, bring them here to hear the joy of music and prayer. Jesus tells the disciples and us in today's gospel, I tell you, open your eyes and look at the fields. They are ripe for harvest. The saying that one sows, another reaps is true. I sent you to reap what you have not worked for. Others have done the hard work, and you have reaped the benefits of their labor. UCC pastor Catherine Foote at University UCC writes about the wisdom of gardeners. That brings up the piece of wisdom that the gardeners know. We are surrounded by mystery. Ecclesiastes says it this way, in the morning sow your seed, and at evening do not let your hands be idle, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike are good. Sometimes tending our fields will bring up unexpected, hidden blessings. In Matthew, we hear Jesus tell us to be open to these blessings and to look for them. The kingdom of heaven, he gave the story of a man. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. A couple of days after that last tomato disappeared, I was coming up the walk to my house when I noticed a very strong vine growing up through the bushes. There's one out front here in the church. It was coming out of the middle of the bushes, had nothing to do with the bush. And it was a boxwood that's at the foot of my stairs. So I went, and it was right across from the tomato plant. Now, I know I never planted anything there, ever. So I went over to see, and I pulled it aside and followed the vine, and there, hidden inside the bushes, was a perfect little pumpkin. It was doing its best to continue to grow, protected by the bush. I remember what my parents said to me, that I was so good at raising pumpkins, I could do it without even trying, and this was a case of that. So this little pumpkin, it's a little white pumpkin, is, I guess, God's consolation for God having other plans for my harvest. Jesus reminds us that he is the true vine and we are the branches. As field hands in God's garden, we can take the unripe fruit of the faith of people around us, and we can protect it from the theft of false Christianity and false doctrine, and let it ripen in the sunshine of God's joy and kindness. Green tomatoes can still become one fine summer soup. Amen. I wish you joy. I wish you peace. I wish you tomatoes that stay on your vine. I wish you compassion towards people and realize that maybe this time, because it's changing a bit, there's more of a chance for us to be joyful and to realize that the future here is going to be wonderful if we make it wonderful. So you are the gardeners of those feelings, the gardeners of that joy, the gardeners of those people who need to come and find that they belong. May God bless you and keep you all this week as you go forth in this effort. May God guide your feet. And if you're traveling, may God protect you in your travels. And if you're coming back from vacation, may God help you find all those things you forgot about when you were away. And if you're healing, may God help you heal even more quickly. And we'll meet again next week. Amen.